Hello and welcome to the Driving in Wyoming podcast. This is Aaron Turpin from AaronOnAutos.com. This is the second half of our virtual tour of the Forney Museum of Transportation in Denver, Colorado. In our first half, we started with a 1905 Franklin and worked our way forward to a 1922 Samson truck. We're going to pick up from there and we're going to go forward all the way to 1981. So sit back and relax and watch. This will be a fun look at that museum. By the way, if you haven't been there, this is just a very small sampling of what they have. I focused on automotive for this and only did a select number of them. What you're seeing in these two podcasts is maybe a third of what is in that museum. It is just huge. You should go down there at the soonest opportunity. You can find them at forneymuseum.org, Forney museum.org. So picking up from that 1922 Samson, we go to a 1923 Hispano Suiza Victoria Town Car. This is a model H6A. This is an iconic vehicle for the time. This is the top of the line, the best you could get, etc., etc. It had a large V8 engine. It was made by a company that made aircraft engines. This particular car has a long history. This particular car was owned by King George II, King of Greece. It was owned by D.W. Griffith of Hollywood, the director, and it appeared in a 1933 film, My Lips Betray Me, and in a few war movies. So this car in particular has been around a lot. They stopped producing these cars in France in 1938, but they continued making them in Spain to the Second World War. This was one of the most glamorous vehicles you can own, and you can see from the photos, it's just magnificent. You may remember we mentioned Kissel before. This is a 1923 Kissel Speedster. This is a Model 45 called the Goldbug. This was owned by Amelia Earhart. She called it her Yellow Peril. This is a great car, not just because it was owned by one of the most iconic women of our time, but also because the car itself, for the period of around the 1920s, this was the almost epitome. This was the epitome of what you could do with speed and power at the time. It's a beautiful example of what was going on in those times. This was a entirely custom-made car, and every single one of these was custom-made. That was the norm. So, very beautiful car to see, with a rich history. Now we're going to jump into a couple of really cool commercial vehicles. First off, we have this 1923 Stutz Model C. This is a triple combination fire engine. This is the top of the line that your fire brigade could have in the 1920s. This particular one actually saw service as a fire truck until 1952. Triple combination means that it is a fire engine that's equipped with a water pump, a tank, and a hose. It was capable of moving 750 gallons per minute of water, and it's one of only 12 that were made in 1923. You may recognize the name Stutz. This is the Stutz Fire Engine Company, which was a subsidiary of Stutz Motor Car Company, which existed from 1911 to 1935 and is best known for the Bearcat. So this is a very cool fire engine. The company stopped making fire trucks in 1929. This particular model was their best seller, and it was sold in 32 states across the U.S. and Tokyo, Japan. So very, very cool. Next, we have the last of the Ford Model TT trucks. The 1927 model year was the last year they made this truck before going to the Model AA. Ford interchanged their cars and trucks. So the Model T car had almost, I think it's 80 or 85% parts interchangeable capability with the Model TT truck, and the Model A continued that ideal. The commercial market at that time was large but not huge. Ford made a lot more money selling cars than they did commercial trucks, but the commercial truck industry was large enough that they pushed these out there and sold the hell out of them. To give you an idea, in 1927, over 40,000 of these one-ton trucks were built in various body combinations. So again, the market was nothing until that point, and then it became very, very large. 1928, Ford, of course, introduced the Model A, and so came the AA pickup truck. Next, we're going to look at a duo of Rolls-Royce Phantoms. This one is a 1927 Rolls-Royce Phantom 1. It was originally owned by Prince Ali Khan. He's known probably best for his mention in a verse of Noel Coward's 1950s lyrics for a song called Let's Do It, Let's Fall in Love, which was sung by Cole Porter. Anyway, this is the first of the Rolls-Royce Phantoms, and it would become the progenitor for a very long line of great vehicles. It's just beautiful to see. Next, we go to the 1931 Rolls-Royce Phantom 2. Whereas the Phantom 1 we just saw was introduced in 1925, the Phantom 2 was introduced in 1929 as their new model. This was the last one to use the 7.7-liter 470 cubic inch straight six-cylinder pushrod overhead valve motor. Interestingly, most people don't know this, but the reason that Rolls-Royces in that period did not always look the same is because the Rolls-Royce Phantoms were delivered without a body, and then the buyer contracted a coach builder to build the body for them. So many famous people in automotive history, including probably the most well-known automotive designer ever, Harley Earl of General Motors, began their careers as coach builders. So they took chassis from companies like Rolls-Royce and Cadillac and so forth, and they put custom-built bodies for the buyer on them. So this is a beautiful piece of history, and when these were shipped as a chassis, they included the iconic, instantly recognizable hood ornament. That is the Spirit of Ecstasy, which Rolls-Royce used all the way up until just recently. Next, we come to one of the most iconic Fords ever made. This is the 1932 Ford Deluxe Phaeton. This is the first year that Ford put a V8 engine, and it was also the first year that Chevrolet outsold Ford in the market. Open cars like this were rare because most people preferred the closed-in cars at the time. Also, this car is very hard to find simply because it is very popular among hot rodders who like to chop it up and do a lot of other things to it and otherwise mangle its history. Now we come to one of the most easily recognized cars ever. You probably saw it in the background of those Rolls-Royces before. This is a 1934 Pierce Arrow. This is the enclosed drive limousine. This is probably the most prestigious and finest automobile made at the time. It's funny because the company actually originally made bird cages and ice boxes, not cars. It's a company that was founded in Buffalo, New York in 1865, and one of its owners bought controlling interest in the firm and reorganized it as the Pierce Company in 1872, and around 1900 is when it started entering the field of automotive. It started with a steam car, which failed miserably, and then it jumped into gasoline cars. The first one was made in 1904. This one right here is probably the best. It's definitely their bestseller and easily the only Pierce Arrow that anybody knows about. It's just beautiful. Just look at this car. It is just beautiful. It is ultra fashionable with the fastback styling. It's got dual fenders. It's got all kinds of great stuff. It's just a beautiful, beautiful car. Pierce Arrow went out of business shortly after this in 1938. Now we're going to jump right back into commercial vehicles. This is a 1935 Chevrolet dump truck. This is a 1.5-ton truck that had a redwood dump box added to it with a hydraulic dump mechanism. This truck has been in Colorado for its entire life, which is a kind of a cool background story for it. It's a 6-cylinder, 26 horsepower with a standard synchromesh transmission, gross vehicle weight of 5,400 pounds. Really cool. Of course, one look at this and you know exactly what this is. This is a Willys Overland Jeep. This is a CJ3A, which was the second generation of the civilian models. They started making civilian Jeeps in 1945, but they began building Jeeps themselves in 1941, obviously for the military. The CJ2A was basically a stripped-down version of the military version, which was usually called the MB, and then the 3A was the first one designed specifically for civilians, so it was made specifically just to sell to civilians in the market. The CJ3A was built all the way to 1953. And in that year, what you're seeing here now is the 1953 Willys Jeep. This is the military version. It was driven for a Marine Corps 2-star general, has a 50 caliber machine gun mounted. This is almost the last of the Jeeps that were made for the military. Jeep, of course, now is owned by Chrysler and sells only civilian vehicles. Now we have a fun car. This is a 1955 Messerschmitt bubble car. These were made starting in 1953 and all the way till 1964. They were built, obviously, because after World War II, the Messerschmitt company was not allowed to make aircraft. So they decided to come up with an automobile, and their idea was a three-wheeled motorcycle type car, which were called cabin scooters at the time. And so aircraft engineer Fritz Fenn sat down and decided to design the perfect enclosed motorcycle. Interestingly, the first generation of this was called the KR-175. That was the model number. They made about 15,000 of those until 1955, which was replaced by the KR-200 model, which is what you're seeing right here. This is very, very cool. You enter through the canopy, which is hinged on the right-hand side, and it has a little 191cc or 11.7 cubic inch, 10 horsepower engine in it. It's air-cooled. It's a single-cylinder two-stroke, and it's positioned in front of the rear wheel. So it's behind the passenger seat. Top speed for this is about 65 miles per hour, so it was not bad. It gets about 87 miles to the gallon. Next, we have the car that is at the front of the museum. This is the first car you'll see as you walk in. This is a 1957 Ford Skyliner. I see these at auto shows every so often, and they are just one of the coolest cars ever designed. They have that retractable hardtop that is impossible to ignore. This particular car is a display vehicle from the Mile High Skyliners Car Club. It's very, very neat. Next, we have a 1961 Dodge Dart Seneca. This is the Enforcer police car package. You'll instantly recognize this for what it is because this is the car that is almost always shown as the police car in television shows and movies depicting the period, despite the fact that the Plymouth police car actually sold 4 times as well as this did. Regardless, Dodge really pushed this car, and it's just a great example of what they could do with a Dart. And to sell these, they sold it in every option they had. You could get any engine you wanted, whatever, even though it was a fleet car. So they were trying to kind of make the next step forward to sell these cars in fleets because they were so far behind everybody else. Very cool car. And last but not least in our lineup from the Forney Museum, this is the 1981 Freeway. It was a three-wheeled car made by HM Vehicles in Minneapolis. They built about 700 of these from 1980 to 1982. They're meant to be high fuel mileage vehicles with ranges from 40 to 75 miles per gallon. It has a 16 horsepower little engine in it. The transmission is centrifugal with one gear that features a variable drive. The company was purchased by DNA Vehicles, and after it went through bankruptcy, that company then took this car and developed it further to make the Minikin, which appeared in 1985. So for three-wheeled buffs, there you go. That concludes our tour of the Forney Museum of Transportation in Denver, Colorado. This is a great place. You really need to go and see it. Totally worth the trip. So thank you very much for watching. This has been Aaron from AaronOnAutos.com with your Driving in Wyoming podcast.